What's going on, guys? Scar coming at you with another Magic the Gathering video, and today's we'll be diving into some more budget decks. Finally, now that I've been able to officially stay on MTG Arena longer than 5 minutes today to actually do stuff, I've cracked open my packs from my pre-orders. I've bought in some gems to get some more packs, but overall, I mean, it's been quite a day for MTG Arena as a whole. I'm sure there's you guys who are frustrated as of the recording of this video that just trying to get on the MTG Arena on the release date of Zendikar Rising has been the biggest pain in the world. Many black screens, many load-in screens and whatnot. But enough said about that, guys. I was finally able to kind of craft a couple decks together that are budget friendly, that have a Zendikar Rising flavor to them, because I think some of these decks got like a certain flavor or added things to it to make them overall better, coming from Zendikar Rising. But with that being said, guys, enough of that. Let's dive into the decks and break down each one. All right, so the first deck up is a Selesnya Party build that I kind of came up with. It's kind of budget friendly. It has overall a very interesting mechanic. If you don't know what the party mechanic is, I did post a video about what party is, but essentially is if you have certain things in your party, you kind of get added benefits of it. So certain cards cost less, you get certain pumps and things like that. I also kind of added some equipments into the deck to kind of pump up our creatures that we have in the deck overall, and I did throw some cards into the sideboard that are cards you can look at to upgrade the deck as you want to play more of it. With that being said, let's dive into what is exactly in the deck and kind of go over why I made some certain choices. So to start off, the Skyclave pickaxe is kind of like an enchantment or artifact, I should say, that I found pretty interesting. Sure, the equip cost does cost 3, but the idea that when it comes into the battlefield, we get to attach target creature control. And the benefit of what it does, other than it just being an equipment, is that every time we play a land into the battlefield, we give target creature +2/+2 until end of turn. So essentially, whatever this is equipped to, you now get that thing pumped up +2/+2. The one thing I did realize in the mana base, I didn't add anything to fetch. In the budget style, I probably would put some Evolve and Wilds as the budget option. I know they come into the lands that you do search for come into play tapped, but that'd probably be a good option there, because you get one initially for the Evolve and Wilds and then one initially on the land that comes into play tapped. So essentially giving your creature possibly +4/+4, which I think overall is a good value. I'll make that adjustment in the actual deck list, so when you guys go to maybe possibly import this into Arena, it'll be updated there. Follow that up, we got Strength and Solidarity. It's a 1-cost sorcery spell that we get to choose target creature we control. It gets +1/+1 counter on it for each creature in our party. We do have cards in the deck that have certain party roles, and we do have certain cards that counts as multiple party members just for it being in the deck. The other thing I should say about the deck is we do actually play 4 rares or 4 mythics at most, or a combination of both, just to kind of give you a heads up. Or we play also cards that do come from the starter decks that you should just have as you've been playing MTG Arena and unlocking your starter decks as well. But this deck is only a budget of 4, so the most you're going to spend in this is 4 rares. So don't worry about that, and then the sideboard has the option to actually spend more rares as you get them as well. Then we follow that up is we have the Synergy Shelter. Target creature we control gains protection of a color of our choice until end of turn, kind of helping our creature survive if our opponent's playing like a spot removal spell or a bounce spell or even like a burn spell. Or if our opponent's not really playing anything aggressive that is directly against one of our creatures, we can always play this into the battlefield as a tapped land, giving us like additional mana sources. These model lands, we'll kind of see how they play out. This is definitely good in the early game when maybe you just need that land drop and this is in your hand. Then we're going to follow that up with the Skyclave Cleric. It's a 2-mana 1/3. When it enters the battlefield, we get to gain 2 life. Really here, this is just kind of like maybe a possibly against a more aggressive deck. This is kind of good to have for some life gain. And also 1/3 is a pretty decent sized blocker. And if worst case scenario, you don't really need it, you can always throw it into the battlefield into play tapped, which makes it another good ability as well. Then we have the Dauntless Survivor, which is a 2-mana 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, which you can target itself to make it a 2/2 for 2, or you can target something else in your party to equip it up. I threw it in here just because it is a human warrior, so it kind of counts as that party mechanic. This is the warrior part of it. Then we throw it up with the Tarjuru Paragon. This is the rare in the deck. It's also a cleric, rogue, warrior, and wizard. It has a kicker at 3, so in the later game, if you do play it, you can kick it for 3. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, we have to reveal the top 6 cards of our library. You may put a card that shares a creature type with it from among them into your hand, and put the rest on the bottom of your library. So what this does essentially helps us dig for a little bit more party members, essentially helping us out in the late game if we're trying to like dig for a little bit, trying to find more answers, maybe get the board a little bit wider. Overall, we'll kind of see how this plays out, but I feel like out of all the rares that you could craft to help with the party mechanic, I felt like this was one of the better ones just because it counts as all the party members. So that's kind of where we went with that. And followed up, we do also do the Relic Axe because it's a 2-cost equipment with a 2-cost equip effect. Equip creature gets +1/+1. If it's a warrior, it gets +2/+1. Like I said, we do play warriors in the deck, so we can do the +2/+1, as well as the +1/+1 overall is just a decent bonus to kind of make all our smaller party members a little bit bigger, just as a nifty like pump spell, just to kind of overall have a static effect. And we can always re-equip it later in the game if we want to move to something else. We also played Allied Assault. It's a 3-cost instant speed spell. Up to 2 target creatures we control each get +X/+X, where X is the number of creatures in our party. So essentially we can give, you know, creatures we control +4/+4, which essentially is a pretty decent spell to bump our creatures +4/+4, kind of surprising our opponent, maybe catch them off guard. Overall pretty decent in that sense. Then we also got Journey to Oblivion, which I only did 2 of just because it's a little expensive, but this spell costs 1 less for each creature in our party. When it enters the battlefield, we have to exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls until Journey to Oblivion leaves the battlefield. So it's pretty much like a Banish and Light buff party. I kind of wanted to see how it plays out. I dabbled like a little bit into some games I haven't really played through, so there is probably some tweaks you can always make as you play it out. Just because the servers have been so unstable, it's been really tough to really essentially get some games in and actually kind of figure out if it's good or not, just because of the instability of the overall servers. So I do apologize if the decks do feel a little clunkier. Usually I try to clean them up before I post them, but I felt like these are in a good place to just kind of give to you guys, and then I will go over how it upgrades. And then the last card in the deck that's really just you know, another party member. It's a 6 mana vigilance 5/5. It also is a cleric, rogue, warrior, or wizard, so it's like a human that has all this, so it kind of counts as an all party member, and it costs 1 less for each creature in our party, which helps out with the whole party mechanic. If we have the Dauntless Survivor and maybe another couple other things, this thing could be really cheap. So a 5/5 with vigilance is always good, and this could be a good target to put like your Skyglade pickaxe on or something like that. But overall, a pretty decent card. And I mean, the party mechanic is very interesting. I didn't really want to go too crazy with the colors just because we're playing budget. I could have splashed in other colors to make have certain abilities to help make the whole party thing much better. The other thing too is, like I said, Evolving Wilds is probably the land I'm going to add into the deck until you get Fabled Passages, as well as I realized I didn't also put the dual lands, the gain 1 life dual lands. I would also suggest for mana efficiency, you can always play the model lands. I think there is a green-white land, so you can either choose the green side or the white side for additional mana. But right now this is what the mana base is, but like I said, I'll fix the mana base, so when you do the deck, when you click on the deck list will have the updated mana, and the rare land I'll throw in the sideboard as an upgrade option in case you want to add that. So we go into the sideboard here, and we want to take a quick look on what I added as a possible upgrade ability. So we got Squad Commander. It's a 4 mana 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white core warrior token creature for each creature in our party. So the more party members we have, the more 1/1 white warrior tokens we're going to get. At the beginning of our combat on your turn, if we have a full party, creatures we control get +1/+0 and gain indestructible end of turn, so it makes our board very wide. We can swing in, everything has indestructible until end of turn, so we can kind of be very aggressive and swing in, and just getting additional tokens is pretty good to help out with our whole party mechanic. Then we also got Tazari, Beacon of Unity. It's a 5 mana 4/6. This spell costs 1 less for each creature in our party, so it can get cheaper. We can tap 2 mana, 2 colorless ×4, or we can tap a blue, a black, a red, and or a green, and we can look at the top 6 cards of our library and reveal up to two cleric, rogue, warrior, or wizard and or ally cards among them, put them into our hand, put the rest on the bottom of our library in any order. So essentially what this does is kind of like helps us dig a little bit deeper into our deck, kind of exactly like what the Chargeru Paragon does with the kicker. This is just another additional ability. We only did a 2 of if you want to add them into the deck. Like I said, you want to possibly add in the green-white land, the model land, or however you say it, into the deck as well. Maybe Fatal Passages for the landfall. But overall, this is the Selesnya style party deck. Like I said, this is something that you probably tweak if you kind of see if you kind of feel like certain things play out a little bit better to remove or add. Maybe if you want to go auras instead of equipments, that's another idea. Maybe play the Selesnya champion. which, you know, he gets the +1/+1 for each aura that you play or whatever, and draws a card. So you know, you kind of go each their own, kind of figure out where you want to go with this. But I figured equipments were kind of cool. I wanted to try to play as many Zendikar cards in the budget deck. But with that being said, let's move on to the next deck. So the next deck we have up here is a Naya Warriors deck. Essentially what this is doing is playing the new Warriors that kind of came in with Zendikar Rising. This is one of those ones where it gets a little, where the you know, the rare base is a little bit more tricky. We are playing you know, up to 4 wild cards that you may have to craft, but the rares we do play, if it goes over that, are rares essentially that you should have based on the starter deck. So we do have a couple extra rares, so technically when you copy this deck, it will say you have 7, but I think essentially the rares that we have extra copies of over the 4 are either rares that you get in the starter deck, so you should just have them in your collection regardless if you have the starter deck unlocked. But the only one that I think that you won't have that you'll have to craft initially is actually the Kargan Intimidator. He's a new warrior from Zendikar Rising that essentially is kind of like one of the key cards that helps our warriors overall become good. But with that being said, let's kind of go one by one. So I also decided to play the Skyclave Pickaxe just because, yet again, it's another solid equipment that it costs 1. Yet again, Evolving Wilds, Fabled Passages are what I got to add to this mana base, which I didn't do, but it helps out overall. Fabled Charger, it's a 1 mana 1/1 Goblin Warrior. As long as it's equipped, it has haste. Whenever it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So it's a good, interesting kind of card that you can swing in. If they kind of block it and they kill it, you can actually now fling that damage, that its power that it has, to, you know, your opponent's face and or one of their creatures, which essentially with, like, you know, Evolving Wilds or Fabled Passage, you can possibly get, you know, this to a 5/5 with the pickaxe, doing that additional damage, you know, maybe eliminating a big creature or something like that. We threw in the Seasoned Hallowed Blade, which is a good creature for the deck because it's a 3/1 warrior. You can discard a card, we can give it indestructible to end a turn, which makes it a good blocker, essentially because we can block with it. Or, you know, we can also swing in very aggressively and also, you know, give it indestructible, so that either have to block and let their creature die in the process, and or, you know, we save our card. Then we have Goma the Fada Vanguard, which is a 2 mana 2/2. Whenever it attacks, target an opponent controls with power less than or equal to the number of warriors you control can't block this turn. So essentially, because we're playing a warrior deck, I actually think this is a pretty interesting card here. Pretty much what we can do is we can kind of take their biggest creature, and essentially if we have a lot of warriors out, we can make that big creature not be able to block our warriors we have, so essentially helping us out overall. Next card up is the Intimidator, which is a 2 mana 3/1. It can't block, or cowards can't block warriors, and you may be like wondering, like, what's a coward, because I haven't seen any cards that say coward. Essentially, it has an ability. We can choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn, so we can choose up to 3 of these for 1 colorless mana, and it gets +1/+1 till end of turn. We can give target creature becomes a coward till end of turn, and target warrior gains trampled end of turn. So essentially, we can make like a warrior really, really big with the pickaxe, possibly, you know, give it trample until end of turn, make a creature a coward so it can't block, and then give this additional +1/+1, which is also very good. You know, essentially being kind of aggressive when it comes to it. Followed up by the Dauntless Survivor, which we saw in the other deck. It's a 2 mana 1/1. We can give target creature +1/+1 counter, which is very good. It is a warrior. It does cost green mana. We also throw the Relic Axe in here, which is another thing that attaches to a creature. Equipped creature gets +1/+1. If it's a warrior, it gets +2/+1. Our deck has a lot of warriors, so essentially most of the creatures that this equips to will give an additional +2/+1. And it comes into the battlefield and attaches automatically to a creature, which is also pretty sweet. Then we got Warden of the Chain, which is a 4/4 3 mana trampler. It can't attack unless we control another creature with a power 4 or greater. Essentially, you know, it is kind of like a decent chumper. It's kind of like our Lovestruck Beast for the deck. But, you know, essentially, as we get our creatures up bigger and bigger with certain things like equipments and or pump effects, this thing will be able to swing in with trample. Could be a good target to put up the pickaxe onto, because then you can make it like an 8/8 trampler, which would be pretty sweet. Then follow that up, we got pretty much our warrior lord, our 3 mana 3/3er. Other warriors we control get +1/+1, which is definitely very beneficial, making all our warriors just that much stronger. Essentially, just overall pretty solid card. 3/3 is pretty solid because it's pretty aggressive in the sense that it has high power, and a pretty solid base because it doesn't really die to, you know, shocks and things like that. Then we get the Ogre Pile Driver, which is our Battle Driver, which is a card that's from the starter deck. I think you get 2 of them. I could be wrong. You could always subtract 1, maybe add something in that. I have one that's a copy of. That's an uncommon, but I think you get 2 of them in the starter deck. But whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control, that creature gets +2/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. What essentially this does, it turns on our warriors once they come into the battlefield, essentially give them the immediate haste. which makes us very aggressive on our opponent, which can turn any of our big creatures right into attacking our opponent right in the face. Overall, pretty sweet card to kind of mix with the warrior aggressiveness. Then I got Proud of the Wild Bonder. It's a 4-mana 4/3 trampler. Creatures we control with trample may have this creature assign combat damage as though it were in block. Bigger trampler creatures just that little bit more dangerous. Essentially, you know, we can have them pretty much swing and hit our opponent for 4 to our opponent's face. But overall, pretty solid card. We have 2 of in the deck. We don't have too many tramplers, but a decent card regardless to kind of help out and kind of round out our warrior tribal. Of course, we got the Embercleave, which is another one of that I think you get in the Stomp deck. That is like the first deck you unlock from the color challenge after you do the monocolor challenge. So I think you should at least have 1 copy in your collection immediately. But essentially, when we swing in aggressively, the more creatures we swing in, the less this costs. And pretty much we can have this come in at flash speed. We can have it attached to target creature control. Equip creature gets +1/+1, double strike and trample. Essentially just making it like our finisher kind of card, just because, you know, we can put it on a big creature. Now this big creature's doing, you know, 8 damage, 10 damage, whatever damage a turn, and then our opponent really can't do too much with it, because if they don't spot removal it or be able to absorb all of it, big chunk like this of damage could definitely pretty much swing the game into our favor. And of course I have the Veteran Adventurer. Yet again, it's another card that also is a Cleric, Rogue, Warrior, and Wizard, and costs 1 less for each creature we have in our party. Essentially, this is not going to be any cheaper than a 5, because I don't think I play anything other than Warriors in this deck, but I just thought it was like a decent 5/5 with Vigilance, so you could put like an Embercleave on this, which essentially then becomes a 6/6 with Vigilance and Trample and double strike, which could be pretty dangerous. But overall, I thought it was just a good top end to possibly add to the deck, just without adding any more rares. And then the land base is like, you know, a mixture of 4 plains, 9 mountains, 5 forests, you know, a mixture of the duals. I would suggest possibly putting some Evolved Wilds in to help, you know, filter your mana, because just playing, you play more lands, it gets a little more tricky to get the exact colors you did. Or you need, we really don't need too much in the way of white. The War Leader and the Halibut are the only things that really are white in our creature base. But I would say, you know, why we have these lands that have more white in them, just because we want to make sure we have the white when we do play the cards. But overall, you know, we're still keeping the green and the red intact and having more of those, because there's more of that in the deck. Now onto the sideboard, and there's actually quite a few cards that you can add to the deck to make it that much better, I think, overall for a warrior style deck. You can add Fervent Champions to make our deck a little bit more aggressive. I don't know why I actually added Fervent Champion. Now looking at it, it's not a warrior, it's a knight. So I'm actually gonna take that out, because I want to keep the thing of, you know, warriors intact, because it is a warrior tribal. Shadow Spears are very good in equipment that you can replace like the Relic Axe or something. Pretty much it gives our creature +1/+1 trample and lifelink. And we can pretty much give make our opponent's creatures lose hexproof and indestructible in a turn, which essentially if they have anything that gives them indestructible, this will make them lose it. But I think Shadow Spear is a very good card up until you get to your Embercleave. Gain life, you know, I would say probably play no more than 2 or 3, just because it's a legendary artifact. You can have multiple copies on the battlefield. Then we move on to the Maul of the Skyclaves, which I think is another good equipment that came out of Zendikar Rising. It enters the battlefield, attached to target creature control. The equipped creature gets +2/+2. It has flying and first strike. Which essentially you can take one of your big creatures now, start flying with a flying first striker, possibly trample in the air, which then makes your opponent go, oh. But overall, pretty cool card in general. Then you have the Shatterskull Charger, which is another new warrior. It has trample and haste. It's a 3 cost 4/3, has a kicker 2. If it was kicked, enters the battlefield loaded +1/+1 counter on it at the beginning of our end step. If it wasn't kicked, or doesn't have a +1/+1 counter on it, we turn it back to our hand. So essentially we can swing in for 4 damage, bounce it back if we think our opponent's possibly even playing a board wipe, and then bring it back the following turn, replay it, or possibly kick it in the later game. But overall, pretty decent card in general to kind of swing in and get some additional damage in. Then you got Ikoria the Fierce Voyager. It's a 3-mana 3/3er. When we attack a player with 1 or more equipped creatures, draw a card, and then we can tap 1 white. We may unattach an equipment from a creature we control. If you do, tap that creature. It gains indestructible end of turn. Essentially, if they decide to block one of our creatures and we think they can kill it, we can unequip the equipment that's on it, and we can actually give the creature indestructible, which I think is a pretty cool, like, you know, a pretty cool ability. Also, as well, if they decide to do a board wipe, we can actually give it indestructible, like I wouldn't, unfortunately, it's like Shatter the Sky. It wouldn't be like anything that exiles, you know, things from the battlefield, but I think that's a pretty cool ability as well. Legion Angel is another interesting card, because when it enters the battlefield, we may reveal a card we own named Legion Angel out from outside the game and put it into our hand. So essentially, you just need to have a couple of these in your sideboard if you want to try to draw to it. It's a 4-mana 4/3 Angel will fly in, which I think is pretty cool, and the ability to get another one from your sideboard into your hand when you do play it, I think is a cool way to kind of your hand full, so essentially you replace your angel with another angel as you play the angel. So I'd say you probably want to run 2 of these in your main board and probably 2 in your sideboard, so that when you play this angel, you get another angel, which then would get the angel from your sideboard, the second angel from your sideboard into your hand. So it's like essentially just replacing angels with angels. But that's pretty cool. Then you got Haktos, which is definitely a good warrior. It's a 6/1. It attacks each turn if able. When it enters the battlefield, choose 2, 3, or 4 at random, so it chooses automatically, and pretty much has protection from each converted mana cost other than the chosen number. So if it chooses like 3, 4, or 2, you know, you can't target it with except for things of that number. So definitely a cool card. Then there's Nahiri, which is the planeswalker, which is like the equipment planeswalker. Pretty much it's a overall good solid planeswalker for an equipment deck. It creates warrior tokens, which is pretty cool. Create a 1/1 warrior token. You may attach an equipment we control to it. So if we have equipments that aren't attached, we can now equip those unattached equipments to those creatures. We can look at the top 6 cards of our library and reveal a warrior or an equipment card, since our deck's all warriors. And equipments will probably hopefully land one of those, and then we can -3. It deals damage to target creature or planeswalker equal to twice the number of equipments we control. So overall, like a spot removal, even if we have 2 equipments, that's 4 damage for a -3 loyalty, which is pretty good, which could also get something out of our way if we want to swing it aggressively. But the idea that we can scry and actually make 1/1 white warrior tokens and equipments to them automatically without having to pay it by just plussing the loyalty, I think is a pretty solid thing for like an equipment style warrior deck. Of course, more Embercleaves is always good, just because Embercleave is kind of like the big finisher. If we can get to this, it pretty much seals the game in a way, just because if we have the right creatures out and we're being very aggressive and our opponent doesn't have too much to really absorb the damage, this Embercleave is going to finish out the game, and just having more copies makes it just more consistent to kind of draw into them. And then I thought it would be pretty interesting because it is a Minotaur warrior, I believe. I think it's what it is, but each creature we control gets +1/+0 each time it attacks this turn. And then landfall whenever a land enters the battlefield under control. If it's our main phase, there's an additional combat phase after this phase. At the beginning of our next that combat step, untap all creatures we control. So essentially, we can swing in very aggressively. In the sense we get 2 attack phase whenever we play a land. Just making it overall a very interesting card. I would say this is like a 1 or 2 of at most, just because it's super expensive. But given our warrior deck to become more aggressive, I think overall is a very interesting way. And this could kind of finish out a game in the late game. You draw this on turn turn 6 when you can play it, then play a land, or just crack a Fable Passage or a Evolve in Wilds, and then all of a sudden you get a second main phase. Or if you play the Fable Passage on 3 and you play this, then you play this at the Fable Passage afterwards, you get that additional main phase or combat step, then you can crack it again and get an additional combat step, which essentially just finishes out the game. Another interesting card too is another model card. It's a Mirror Shadow of the Skyclave. We can make it played as a land card, which we can pay 3 life or enters play tapped, or we can tap 7. We can create 2 4/4 white angel warrior token creatures with flying, and non-angel creatures we control gain indestructible until next turn, which essentially we can be very aggressive, swing all in, create 4/4 blockers to kind of if our opponent can kind of swing back, but be very aggressive, and it's a good way to finish up the game. This is yet again a 1 or 2 of, just because it's kind of expensive, but you can always, if you do draw it, you can always play it as a land in the early game until you really need it in the late game. But overall, a very interesting deck. So the next deck up that we have is actually a Cleric deck. What Zendikar Rising did, it because of the party system, it actually added in a whole bunch of Clerics, and I thought this deck was a pretty interesting idea to build around. I did see someone already do like a more built out version of it, but I decided to let's make a budget version of it to make it more accessible to players who are possibly playing Clerics and want to get into Clerics and want to get a start of something. But overall, it's a pretty simple deck on what it's trying to do. Essentially, we are just trying to play everything that's a Cleric to kind of gain benefits from our Clerics that come into the battlefield. We play the Kitesail Cleric. It's a 1 mana 1/1. We can kick her for 3 additional mana when it enters the battlefield. If it was kicked, tap up to 2 target creatures. I thought it was a decent 1/1 flyer, and the ability in the late game to kind of tap some stuff out of our way if we want to swing in aggressively, which is pretty good. Archfiend's Vessel, it's a pretty decent Cleric just because it's a 1/1 lifelinker, and if we were returning it from our graveyard to our to the battlefield, we can essentially turn it from a 1/1 Cleric into a 5/5 Demon with flying, which is very good in the late game, essentially because our opponent's gonna want to not have to deal with a 5/5 flyer, but overall pretty good in that sense. Then we got the Expedition Healer. It's a 2 mana 2/2 Vigilance Cleric. When it has lifelink, as long as we control another Cleric. This deck is all Clerics because it's Cleric Tribal, so it's a 2/2 Vigilance lifelinker for 2 mana, which I think could be very good. Hollow Priest, of course, which is from the starter deck, and it pretty much gains whenever we gain life with a +1/+1 counter on Hollow Priest. Then we got the Impassioned Orinator, which is a 2/2 human cleric. Whenever another creature we control enters the battlefield under control, we gain 1 life. So essentially pumping up things like Hollow Priest, you know, things like that to help us gain more and more life and help bump up our clerics in general. Skyclave Cleric is another cleric that's a 1/3, enters the battlefield, we may gain 2 life, so it helps out with the life gain effect of this. And we can play it as the model land, and we can, you know, have a land come into play tapped as a white mana. But overall, pretty solid thing in general. Eliminate for some spot removal, just because, you know, might as well have some spot removal. You can also do Heartless Act, but I always kind of favor it, especially in this like smaller, mini or aggro aggressive deck, because we want to be aggressive early. That eliminates probably overall the better removal spell. We'll kind of have to figure out something in the late game, but I think when you kind of build into the deck, there's going to be things to add to the deck that overall make our creatures, you know, help, you know, pretty much get rid of the bigger creatures in the late game. Then we have the Cleric of the Life Spawned. It's a 2-mana 2/2er. Whenever a cleric enters the battlefield under our control, we may gain 3 life. Or gain 1 life, I mean. Whenever we gain life for the first time each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on this Cleric of the Life Spawned. So it's a cleric that pretty much essentially gets bigger every time we gain 1 life for the first time. So definitely a good card overall. It definitely creates like this little interesting, you know, thing, kind of like the Hallowed Priest. Call the Death Dweller helps us get our clerics back in case they get put into graveyard. You know, pretty much if you haven't seen this card already, gives, you know, return target creature 2 target creature cards with converted mana cost 3 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. Put a death touch counter on each on either of them, and put a menace counter on either of them. Essentially, if you were going to bring back like an Archfiend's Vessel and like let's just say the Clerics of Life Spawn, you put the counters here because this is just going to exile to turn into a demon. So just as a heads up, we got Demon's Disciple, which is a 3-mana 3/1. When it enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker, so it kind of helps us control the board. Helps us get rid of things like if we want to get the Archfiend's Vessel because we have a Call of the Death Dweller in our hand, we can always sacrifice the Archfiend's Vessel, play this, make our opponent sacrifice something before we swing in for attack or something like that. But overall, pretty good, decent board removal spell as well. We got Vito's Thorn of the Dusk Rose, which essentially is kind of like the why we play a lot of life gain. Whenever we gain life, target opponent loses that much life. For 5 mana, creatures you control gain lifelink at the end of the turn. So essentially, no matter if our opponent blocks and or takes the damage and we gain all that life, our opponent's going to take X amount of damage based on how much life we've gained off our life gain effect. Essentially, possibly end of the game right then and there. Then we also have the Sign of the Swarm, which is another thing that whenever we gain life, we get a +1/+1 counter on Sign of the Swarm. So, and then our land base is 8 plains, 10 swamps, and 4 of these. Because we play some of the modal lands, I don't think we, you know, lands don't have to be exactly perfect, and because the modal land is for white mana, that's why our white mana is a little bit less. So the one thing you could add into the deck if you don't have the vetoes or don't have enough after getting getting them in the starter deck, you can add these in, the Maraudon Blight Priest. What essentially it does is when we gain 1 life, each opponent loses 1 life. So essentially it kind of does like the veto does, but the only thing is that if it's like gained in like little chunks, like 2 here, 3 there, 4 there, our opponent's only going to lose 1 life in the process. But this is kind of like a decent option for 3 mana to kind of like, you know, be like kind of a veto until you get more vetoes. But this is kind of something you can look forward to if you want to go super duper budget friendly. You know, play 4 copies or 3 copies. I don't know how many I think you get 1 veto in the starter deck that the veto comes in. So essentially you can play 3 of these until you get, you know, more vetoes and slowly replace these with vetoes. This is like that super budget friendly option in case you don't play any rares in the deck. So moving on to the sideboard, if these are things that you could add into the deck, of course I feel like a perfect cleric for the deck, because it is a cleric, is the Speaker of Heavens. It comes from M21, Vigilance Lifelinker. If we have, you know, 7 more life that we started with, we can make 4/4 White Angel token creatures, which helps us just get our board super wide. Another cool card from you know, Zendikar is the Luminarch Aspirant, which is a 2-mana 1/1er. At the beginning of our combat, on our turn, we may put a +1/+1 counter on target creature control, essentially either making this bigger or making one of our other clerics bigger, which essentially, if it has lifelink or something like that, which, you know, helps out with vetoes and things like that. But overall, pretty cool card with like a overall just adding things to our overall creatures. Then you got the Null Priest of Oblivion. It's a 2-mana menace lifelinker. For a 2/1 power, 1 toughness. You can kick it for 4 when it enters the battlefield. If it was kicked, return target creature from our graveyard to the battlefield. So essentially it has like, you know, a Call of the Death Dweller ability on it. You know, you probably want to play like no more than like, you know, 2 of these at most, just because the kicker is something you're not going to get all the time. But the idea that it has menace and lifelink is pretty cool, because even if our opponent plays like, you know, 1 or 2 creatures, it's not very creature focused deck. This is definitely something that can still get in for some damage, but, you know, overall it kind of has that additional ability in the late game to get back maybe one of our bigger threats from the graveyard to the battlefield. Another good card that came from Zendikar Rising for clerics is Orath, the Skycleave Hierophant. It's a 4-mana 3/3 with lifelink. Whenever Orath, the Skycleave Hierophant, or cleric we control dies, we get to return target cleric with less mana cost from our graveyard to the battlefield. So essentially, if anything dies, we can always go back to the smallest thing, except for 0. We don't have any clerics that cost 0. But if, you know, our 3 cost dies, we can then go get something that's 2 cost. If that 2 cost dies, we can get something that gets 1 cost. Essentially getting our Archfiend's Vessel out from the graveyard to the battlefield. Or we can always get, like, if this dies, we can always get the Veto back if the Veto dies. But overall, it's a pretty cool ability that kind of like triggers and does interesting things that kind of like help our board state actually stay there. Angel of Destiny is another interesting card. It is an Angel Cleric for 5 mana. It's a 2/6 flyer with double strike, and whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to a player, you and that player each gain that much life. At the beginning of your end step, if we have at least 15 more life than our starting life total, each player Angel of Destiny attack this turn loses the game. So essentially what this does, it creates this weird board state in the sense that in the late game, like let's just say we've been playing like Speaker of the Heavens by the time we added this to the deck, and we're already up to like 30 life. We attack in, we gain 4 life here, maybe give all our things lifelink. So essentially getting to that point where we're 15 more, and if we've done damage, if Angel of Destiny has done damage to that player that turn that it attacked, that we're at this point, they lose the game. So it's kind of like this weird you know, board state that could happen. But I thought it's like kind of cool to maybe throw 1 or 2 of in the deck if you want to upgrade these. This effect is not going to happen too often, but a 2/6 flyer is actually a pretty solid blocker as well, which could definitely absorb a lot of damage, helping gain that little bit additional life if possible. But yeah, overall pretty cool. And then of course you got the Bright Claim Pathway, which is the white-black land that you can always play to help fix the mana to replace your tap lands. And Castle Lockthwain is another solid card just because it helps us dig a little bit deeper into our deck. If we're playing a lot of life gain, you know, it's not going to be too bad if we have to lose a little bit of life to draw a card. But overall, this is kind of like what you could do to upgrade. But you know, this is definitely a good start to kind of actually get started with clerics overall as a whole. Now this next deck up is a deck that I feel like a lot of people are going to want to play, and that is Dimir Rogues. Pretty much what Dimir Rogues is, this budget version of the deck, is kind of like a mill slash aggressive style deck. Overall, what it's trying to do is just kind of like play rogues that trigger other rogue abilities. A lot of the rogues have like flash and things like that, so they can kind of come into play at instant speed, kind of reactive to what your opponent's trying to do. But what the deck has in it is we have the Merfolk Wind Robber, which is a 1 mana 1/1 flyer. Whenever it deals damage to a player, that player mills a card, so it has a mill ability initially whenever it gets dealt damage. And you know, if it ever gets targeted by a spell or ability, or even blocks, or someone blocks it, we can always sacrifice it. And we can draw a card, though we only can do it if our opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. But essentially there's a lot of cards that will get cards into their graveyard, so this is not too bad of a card to play in that sense. Of course, we got Opt for a little bit of a draw effect, and we can Scry, you know, instant speed, draw mana, pretty cool. Then you got Thieves Guild Enforcer, which is the 4 of that I think essentially is pretty good to probably have, just because its initial ability, whenever it or another rogue enters the battlefield under our control, each opponent mills 2 cards. As long as our opponent has 8 more cards in their graveyard, it gets +2/+1 and Death Touch, which makes it a pretty good blocker and makes it very interesting for your opponent. And because our deck is very rogue focused, we will mill a lot of cards with this card, essentially because each other rogue itself will then mill 2 cards. You have multiple copies of this, and your opponent's milling 4, possibly even more cards per turn. Then I thought, you know, this is another new card from Zendikar. It counter target creature or planeswalker spell, and its control pays 2. If an opponent has 8 or more cards in the graveyard, instead counter that spell, then scry 2. So I think what that means is essentially if they have 8 or more, essentially now it's a counter creature or planeswalker spell. If we have 8 or more cards, I don't think they can pay anything to pretty much prevent it. And then and then we can also scribe, which is pretty cool. So you can kind of scribe the top of your cards of your library, kind of get maybe answers that you're looking for. But overall, pretty cool in that sense. And we got the Fairy Vandal, which is a 2 mana 1/2 flash flyer rogue. Whenever we draw our second card each turn, we put a +1/+1 counter on Fairy Vandal. Why that was something like Opt, or even like a Merfolk Wind Robber. This thing can get pretty big, which makes a threat. It also has flying, which makes it kind of fly over. So pretty cool in that sense. We got Into the Royal, which is a pretty cool bounce spell. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. If this spell was kicked, to draw a card. So essentially, you know, in the late game, it becomes a little bit better because we can draw off of it. So pretty cool in that sense. Then we got the Cut and Nightbonder, which is a 4 of in the deck, which you can probably cut down because I don't really think we play too many rogues that actually have a lot of colorless in their thing, but you know, in a due sense, I think when it comes to the sideboard, maybe the colorless goes up in the mana cost, but pretty much essentially it's a flash rogue that makes our spells with flash cost 1 less and can't be countered, so essentially pretty good overall. Then we got the Sorin Thought Thief, which is a 2 mana rogue, 1 blue, 1 black. Has flash, has flying. As long as our opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, rogues we control get +1/+0, making our rogues just that much bigger. And whenever 1 or more rogues attack, each opponent mills 2 cards. So essentially, it turns onto a mill of 2 on each time we attack with 1 or more rogues. So even if this doesn't attack in, and maybe our little 1/1 guy attacks in, our opponent's automatically gonna mill 2 cards. So essentially, pretty good effect there. This is another card that's a rogue. It's a 3 mana 2/3. It gets +3/+0 as long as the opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. Has menace, so essentially, possibly even by the turn this comes out, for 3 mana, you could possibly even have a 5/3. Or if, you know, we're in a weird state and we just need some more black mana, we can always play for black mana that comes into play tapped. We're pretty cool in that sense. And it has menace, so our opponent has to automatically block with 2 creatures. Then we got the Sure-Footed Infiltrator, which is a 4 mana rogue. That is a 2/3, tapped another untapped rogue control. Sure-Footed Infiltrator can't be blocked this turn, and whenever a Sure-Footed Infiltrator deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So essentially, you can make it unblockable and get a card draw out of it, which is pretty cool in that sense. And it's good for like a budget style, you know, 2/3. Our opponent may even not block in general because it's not too much damage. And then as for our mana base, it's, you know, 9 islands, 8 swamps, some dismal backwaters. I want to try out the base camp in this deck. Pretty much what it does is it comes in battlefield tap. We can add 1 mana to only cast a Cleric, Rogue, or Warrior Wizard spell, or activate an ability of a Cleric, Rogue, or Warrior Wizard spell. So essentially helping make our rogues and stuff, you know, we can hopefully filter and have the right amount of mana or right color mana to play our rogues. But essentially, I just wanted to play a couple of them, kind of see how it plays out. The downfall is they do come into play tap. That's probably why it's an uncommon. But overall, pretty interesting card to probably play out if you're playing this style of deck. So when it comes to sideboard, this is kind of what I went with. I do have the exact numbers. I think some of the cards were some of the sideboards you may have noticed I only have 1 copies of each. That's just essentially because I thought there was a lot of cards you could add into the deck, and unfortunately you can only put 15 cards in your sideboard without the game yelling at you. So to start off, we got this Thieving Skydiver. It's a 2/1 flyer. Has a kicker of X, and though you can't play the X, can't pay 0 for it, so you can't just say X equals 0. But whenever it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, can control a target artifact with a converted mana cost of X or less. If that artifact is an equipment attached to the Thieving Skydiver, I'm not really sure where that's going to go, but let's just say you're playing an opponent who plays something like Embercleave, and maybe in the late game this comes out, you can actually tap the kicker for 6 and actually gain control of that Embercleave and actually equip it to the Thieving Skydiver. I mean, essentially that means you'd have to survive a lot of turns, but you know, that's pretty good. There's also the couple equipments that cost only 1 mana in that you may have seen in my other decks, so you can pay for 3 mana, equip like that little pickaxe that is in mono green onto this, and then whenever we play a land, it gains a little bit more. But overall, I thought it was a pretty cool deck, pretty cool creature spell to kind of see where equipments land. But you know, it's something that could be looked at. Of course, Brazen Borrower is a good spell just because of the balance effect, and it's a flash flyer, and it's a rogue, so it's a good card in general if you don't have copies of this to add to the deck, just because of the multiple uses of the card. But overall, pretty good card, and I would say you probably want to add as many copies of this, just because I think this card's fairly strong for the rogue style deck. Nighthawk Scavenger is another rogue that we can add. It has flying, death touch, and lifelink. And Nighthawk Scavenger's power is equal to 1 plus the number of card types in our opponent's graveyard. Card types in our graveyards only have the characters of their front face. So essentially, you know, the model cards, because it has a spell and a effect on the back of it, we don't get both. But you know, if we're milling a lot of cards, this thing could be decently big for 3 mana. Even if they have a land, a spell, instant, and a sorcery in their graveyard, this thing's already a 4/3 for 3 mana. The flying, death touch, and lifelink, which overall makes it a pretty interesting thing that our opponent now has to deal with. Rankle's another good card for the deck just because it's fly and haste. We can make a player discard a card. Each player loses 1 life and draws a card, or we can make our opponent sacrifice creatures. Essentially, you know, we can kind of, you know, in a weird way spot removal things, but it's something that you probably want to play a few of if you want to upgrade the deck. And then this is the next thing. This is kind of like the legendary rogue that kind of came in with Zendikar Rising. It's a flash 5 mana creature 4/4. So we tap 4 mana, we can return unblock attacking rogue we control to its owner's hand. We may put it from our hand onto the battlefield, tap attacking, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may put target permanent card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. So essentially, in a weird way, it has like a gain control effect. And and it's a permanent card, so whatever we may have milled, we can take it. It's a land or a creature. It automatically comes onto the battlefield under our control, even equipments and things like that. But overall, it's a fairly interesting card that I kind of figure you want to play 1 or 2 of, just because it's legendary. It's kind of expensive, and it's kind of like its ability is kind of like a reach ability, I would say. And I feel like our opponent, if we play this, are going to probably have ways to probably deal with it. So you don't want to play too many, but at the same time, you want to play enough that I think it's going to be effective. But overall, this is the Rogue deck. With that being said, guys, I mean, hopefully you enjoyed these kind of budget build decks these budget decks that I kind of came up with. As a whole, it was kind of frustrating. It did take me a while to kind of put these together just because of the unstableness of the servers. So I do apologize that there's not more of them. But with that being said, if you guys want to see gameplay of these decks, let me know down in the comments below. If there's any particular one that you want to see play first, you want to see like the budget version, and then you want to see us upgrade it in the video, maybe that's something we could kind of work with. But overall, guys, if you like the video, hit that like button. I'd definitely appreciate it. If you want to know I post more videos, hit that subscribe button. But I'll see you in the next video.